Colonel David Matthews had been in the military for 37 years. He'd shaken hands with generals, pinned medals on heroes, and stood at attention for more flag-draped coffins than he cared to count. But he'd never met a ghost. The Veterans Affairs outreach event was routine. Coffee, handshakes, listen to their stories. He almost missed the old man in the back, almost walked right past. Something stopped him. The way the man held himself, maybe. Discipline, hiding under poverty. "Sir, can I buy you a fresh cup?" They sat. They talked. And when Matthews asked about his service, just being polite really, the old man hesitated. "I flew," he said quietly. "Long time ago." "What was your call sign?" The pause lasted forever. "Hawk 8. Matthews felt the room tilt. His mind raced back to 1991, to a mission briefing, to a name on a memorial wall, to a legend they told new pilots about sacrifice. You can't be." "I am." And in that moment, Colonel Matthews realized he was sitting across from a man the Air Force had mourned for 33 years, a man they'd given up for dead, a hero who'd been invisible all along. Matthews reached for his phone with trembling hands. "I need to make a call," he said. "There's someone who's been waiting 33 years to know you made it home." The old man's face crumpled. "No, please, you don't understand what happened after." "What happened after?" Matthews leaned forward. "What aren't you telling me?" The veteran looked toward the door, as if calculating whether he could still run. 3 hours earlier. The morning had started like any other Thursday at Fort Carson's Veterans Affairs Center. Colonel David Matthews arrived at 0800 hours sharp, his uniform pressed with the kind of precision that came from 4 decades of military discipline. At 62, he still moved like a man half his age, though the silver at his temples and the lines around his eyes told stories his posture refused to acknowledge. The outreach program wasn't his idea. Command had suggested, in that way that wasn't really a suggestion, that senior officers participate in community engagement. "Good for morale," they said. "Shows the young ones we care about those who came before." Matthews didn't need convincing. He'd seen too many veterans slip through the cracks, forgotten by the same system that once demanded everything from them. If spending his Thursday mornings listening to war stories and making sure old soldiers got hot meals was what he could offer, then that's what he'd do. The cafeteria smelled like institutional coffee and heating elements that had seen better decades. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that particular shade of reality that made people look tired even when they weren't. About 40 veterans had shown up, more than usual. Word must have spread that they were serving actual breakfast, not just coffee and donuts. Matthews worked the room methodically, shook hands with Korean War veterans whose stories had been told so many times they'd become smooth as river stones. Listened to a Vietnam vet explain again why the VA hospital had messed up his prescription. Laughed at jokes he'd heard before from men who needed to know someone was still listening. He was good at this, present, attentive. He made eye contact, remembered names, asked about grandchildren. These men had earned more than his time. They'd earned his full attention, every minute of it. But even as he moved through the crowd, part of his mind was already calculating the rest of his day. Budget meeting at 1300, performance reviews at 1500, dinner with his wife at 1900, if he could get out of the office on time, which he probably wouldn't. That's when he saw him. The old man sat alone at a corner table, as far from the crowd as the room allowed. He wasn't eating, just holding a styrofoam cup between both hands like it was something precious. His jacket, if you could call it that, had been patched so many times it was hard to tell what the original color might have been. Grey, maybe, or green. The patches themselves were patches of patches, held together with thread that didn't match and hope that had worn thin years ago. But it wasn't the poverty that caught Matthew's attention. He'd seen plenty of that. Too much of it, among men who'd given everything and received so little in return. It was the way the man sat, back straight, shoulders squared, head up, even though his eyes were fixed on the coffee cup. There was a stillness to him that Matthews recognized, the kind of stillness that came from learning to wait, to watch, to conserve energy, because you never knew when you'd need it. Military bearing didn't wash off, no matter how many years passed or how far a man fell. Matthews changed direction mid-stride, leaving a conversation about VA benefits unfinished. Something pulled him toward that corner table, instinct maybe, or recognition of something he couldn't quite name. "Sir," he said, stopping a respectful distance away, "mind if I join you?" The old man looked up slowly. His eyes were pale blue, almost grey, with the kind of clarity that came from seeing too much and learning to keep it all locked away. They swept over Matthews, not just looking, but assessing, taking in the rank, the ribbons, the polished shoes. "It's your cafeteria, Colonel." The voice was quiet but clear, educated. There was a southwestern accent buried under years of something else. Texas, maybe, or Oklahoma. "Matthews," he said, extending his hand. "David Matthews." The old man hesitated just a fraction of a second before shaking. His grip was firm despite the tremor in his fingers. His palm was calloused, marked with the kind of scars that came from hard work and harder times. "Jim," he said. Just that. No last name offered. Matthews sat down across from him, setting his own coffee cup on the scarred laminate table. Up close, he could see more details. The man was probably in his mid-70s, though hardship had a way of adding years that time alone couldn't account for. His face was weathered, lined deep around the eyes and mouth. There was a scar on his left temple, mostly hidden by grey hair that needed cutting. Another scar, more recent, ran along his jawline. But it was his hands Matthews kept noticing. They shook slightly as they held the cup, but the tremor seemed neurological rather than weakness. And there, on the inside of his right wrist, was a mark that made Matthews's trained eye pause. A burn scar, old, the kind of pattern that came from friction, from rope or cable under extreme pressure. Ejection seat restraints left marks like that. "You from around here, Jim?" Matthews kept his voice casual, conversational. "Passing through." "Where you headed?" A slight smile, sad at the edges. "Wherever's warm." They sat in silence for a moment, not uncomfortable but weighted. Matthews had learned over the years that silence was often more eloquent than words. You just had to know how to listen to it. "You look like you could use a hot meal," Matthews said finally. "They've got eggs, sausage, the works. Can I get you a plate?" Jim shook his head. "Coffee's fine." "I'm grateful for it." "When's the last time you ate?" "I eat." "That's not what I asked." Another pause. Jim looked down at his cup. "Yesterday. Day before. Time gets fuzzy." Matthews flagged down one of the volunteers, a retired sergeant who ran the breakfast program with military efficiency. "Charlie, can you bring a full breakfast to this table? Extra everything." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," Matthews said, "but I'm going to." Consider it an order from a superior officer. That got a reaction. Small, but there. A flicker in those pale eyes. Recognition of the phrase, the tone, the chain of command that still existed somewhere in the bedrock of who this man used to be. "You serve?" Matthews asked, though he already knew the answer. Jim nodded slowly. "Long time ago." "How long?" "Long enough that most people don't remember that war anymore." "Vietnam?" "After." The food arrived, a plate piled with scrambled eggs, sausage links, hash browns, toast. Jim stared at it like it might disappear if he looked away. "Eat," Matthews said gently. "We'll talk after." He watched as Jim picked up a fork with those trembling hands. The first bite was careful, almost reverent. Then hunger took over, not desperate, but efficient. Methodical. A man who'd learned to eat when food was available because you never knew about the next meal. Matthews sipped his coffee and waited. Around them, the cafeteria continued its morning rhythm. Conversations rose and fell. Someone laughed at an old joke. A chair scraped against linoleum. Normal sounds, human sounds. But Matthews couldn't shake the feeling that nothing about this morning was normal. When Jim had cleaned his plate, every bite, nothing wasted, he sat back and exhaled slowly. "Thank you," he said. "You didn't need to do that." "Yes, I did." Matthews leaned forward slightly. "You said you served." "What branch?" "Air Force." Matthews felt something click in his chest. "When?" 87 to 91. 4 years, right in the window between Cold War and Desert Storm. Matthews did the math quickly. If Jim was mid-70s now, he'd have been in his early 30s then. Prime age for experienced pilots. "What did you fly?" Jim's hands found the empty coffee cup again, fingers wrapping around it like an anchor. "Different things." "Cargo, mostly." The answer was too vague, too practiced. "Cargo," Matthews repeated. C-130S, among others. "Where were you stationed?" "Moved around, wherever they needed pilots." There it was again, that careful vagueness. Not quite evasive, but definitely not forthcoming. Matthews had interviewed enough personnel over the years to recognize when someone was editing their story. "You see combat?" Jim's jaw tightened, just for a second. "Some." "Desert Storm." "Was there for part of it?" "What part?" A long silence. Matthews waited. "The part where friends didn't come home," Jim said finally, his voice so quiet it almost disappeared under the ambient noise of the cafeteria. Matthews nodded slowly. He'd heard variations of that answer 1,000 times. It was the truth every combat veteran carried, the weight that never got lighter no matter how many years passed. "I lost friends too," Matthews said. "Iraq, 2003, good men, better than me." Jim looked up then, really looked at him. Those pale eyes held something that might have been recognition. Not of Matthews specifically, but of the membership in that terrible club no one wanted to join. The ones who survived when others didn't. "You carry them?" Jim asked. "Every day." "Good. You should. That means you remember." "Do you remember?" Jim's hands tightened on the cup. "I remember everything. That's the problem." Matthews watched a dozen micro-expressions flicker across the old man's face. Pain, regret, something that might have been anger or might have been grief. With veterans, those emotions often looked the same. "Jim," he said carefully, "I've been doing this a long time, and I'm good at reading people. You're holding something back." "Everyone holds something back, Colonel." "True. But most people don't look like they're carrying the weight of the whole damn war on their shoulders." A bitter smile crossed Jim's face. "Maybe I am. What happened over there?" "Same thing that happened to everyone. We did what we were told. Some of us made it back. Some didn't. The end." But it wasn't the end, Matthews could tell. It was barely the beginning. He was about to push further when a young lieutenant approached their table. Fresh-faced, couldn't have been more than 25. His uniform was so new it still had factory creases. "Excuse me, Colonel Matthews?" "They're asking for you at the registration desk. Something about next month's schedule." Matthews wanted to wave him off, but Jim was already pulling back, that wall coming up again. The moment of connection, whatever it had been, was closing. "I should go anyway," Jim said, starting to rise. "Wait." Matthews pulled out a business card. "Take this. My direct line. If you need anything, food, a place to sleep, someone to talk to, you call me." Jim took the card, studied it for a moment, then slipped it into his jacket pocket. Matthews had the feeling it would disappear into the void with all the other things this man had lost. "I mean it," Matthews said. "Any time, day or night." "Why?" Jim asked. "You don't know me." "No, but I know men who serve, and I know when someone's still fighting a war nobody else can see." Something shifted in Jim's expression. Not gratitude exactly, more like exhaustion, the kind that came from being seen when you'd worked so hard to be invisible. "Thank you for the meal, Colonel." He turned to leave, and Matthews almost let him. Almost. But that burn scar on his wrist kept nagging at him, the careful evasions, the way Jim had said part of Desert Storm instead of giving specifics. The sense that this man wasn't just another forgotten veteran, he was something else, someone else. "Jim!" Matthews called out. The old man stopped but didn't turn around. "What was your call sign?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Jim's shoulders tensed. He stood there, frozen, for what felt like an eternity. When he finally turned around, his face had gone pale. "Why do you want to know that?" "Just curious. All pilots have call signs. What was yours?" Jim's eyes flickered toward the exit, then back to Matthews. He was calculating something. Risk versus reward, truth versus safety. "That was a long time ago," he said finally. "Not that long. You don't forget your call sign. It's part of who you are." Was. Part of who I was. So, what was it? The cafeteria noise seemed to fade. Or maybe Matthew's focus just narrowed so completely that nothing else existed except this moment, this question, and the answer he suddenly needed to hear. Jim's lips moved, but no sound came out at first. He cleared his throat, tried again. Hawk 8. The world stopped. Matthews felt his coffee cup slip from his fingers. It hit the table but didn't spill. Some distant part of his brain registered that detail while the rest of his mind raced backward through time. 1991. Desert Storm. He'd been a captain then, working logistics at Prince Sultan Air Base. There'd been a mission, classified at the time, though the broad strokes leaked out later. An extraction gone wrong. 42 men trapped behind enemy lines, Iraqi forces closing in. The pilots who'd volunteered for that mission knew it was a one-way trip. The area was too hot. AAA batteries everywhere. No air support available. Command had written those men off, but someone had gone anyway. Hawk Squadron. 4 pilots in aging a 10 Warthogs, flying low and slow, carrying more courage than common sense. They'd gotten the men out. Every single one of those 42 soldiers made it home. But only 3 pilots came back. Hawk 8 had disappeared in a fireball over Kandahar. They'd found pieces of his aircraft scattered across 3 clicks of desert. No body, no beacon, nothing. KIA, body not recovered. There'd been a memorial service. Matthews had attended, even though he hadn't known the pilot personally. The chapel had been packed. 42 grateful soldiers and their families, thanking a man they'd never meet again. The name had been added to the wall. Captain James McAllister, call sign Hawk 8, posthumous Silver Star for extraordinary heroism. And now that man, that ghost, was standing in a VA cafeteria, wearing a jacket held together with prayer and duct tape. You can't be... Jim, no, McAllister met his eyes steadily. I am. Hawk 8 died. I was at the memorial. They put your name on the wall. I know. How? Matthews felt his hands shaking now. How is this possible? Because I made it out of the aircraft. Barely. Landed in territory we weren't supposed to know about. Then why? Matthews couldn't finish the sentence. The implications were crashing over him like waves. Why didn't you come home? Why did they declare you dead? Why have you been invisible for 33 years? McAllister's face had that distant look again, but now Matthews understood what he was seeing. This man wasn't just remembering war. He was still living in it. Colonel, McAllister said quietly, you need to let this go. Let it go? You're a goddamn American hero. You saved 42 lives. Your family thinks you're dead. The entire Air Force thinks... They're supposed to think that. Matthews stared at him. What are you saying? I'm saying there are reasons I've stayed dead. Good reasons. And you dragging me back into the light won't help anyone. The families deserve to know. The families have made their peace. What good does it do, after 33 years, to tear open that wound again? Matthews reached for his phone, his mind already racing through the calls he needed to make. Public affairs, personnel records, the Pentagon, for God's sake. I need to make a call, he said, his hands trembling as he pulled out his cell. There's someone who's been waiting 33 years to know you made it home. McAllister's face crumpled, not dramatically, more like a building settling, the foundation finally giving way after decades of pressure. No, please. His voice cracked. You don't understand what happened after. What happened after? Matthews leaned forward. What aren't you telling me? McAllister looked toward the door, as if calculating whether he could still run. His body had tensed, ready for flight, but something held him there. Maybe exhaustion, maybe the relief of finally being seen after years of invisibility. Maybe he was just too tired to run anymore. If I tell you, McAllister said slowly, you have to promise me something. I can't make promises until I know what we're dealing with. Then I walk out that door, and you never see me again. Matthews studied him. Every instinct screamed to stop this man from leaving, to grab him, to lock down the building if necessary. But he'd been in command long enough to know that force didn't work on men like this. You had to earn their trust. All right, Matthews said finally. Tell me what happened. Then we'll figure out what comes next. Together. McAllister stood there for another long moment. The cafeteria had gone quieter, not silent, but people were noticing. The colonel talking intensely with a homeless veteran, both of them looking like the world had shifted on its axis. Not here, McAllister said. Too many ears. Matthews glanced around. He was right. Already a few people were watching, curious. There's a conference room down the hall, private, just you and me. McAllister nodded slowly. Okay, but Colonel, when I'm done talking, you're going to wish you'd let me walk away. Why's that? Those pale blue eyes met his, and Matthews saw something in them that made his blood run cold. Not fear, not pain. Guilt. Because heroes aren't supposed to have secrets like mine, McAllister said quietly. And once you know what I know, you become responsible for it too. You sure you want that burden? Matthews thought about the families. The 42 men who'd made it home, the memorial wall with McAllister's name on it, the 3 decades of mourning and questions. Yeah, he said, I'm sure. Then let's go, before I change my mind. They walked together toward the hallway, Matthews leading the way. Behind them, the cafeteria slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but several pairs of eyes followed them, and more than one person pulled out a phone. Good news traveled fast in military communities, but secrets traveled faster. And neither man realized that the moment McAllister had spoken those 2 words, Hawk 8, they'd set something in motion that couldn't be stopped. The conference room was grey and windowless, lit by the same fluorescent lights that hummed throughout the building. A long table stretched down the center, surrounded by chairs that had seen better decades. The walls were bare except for a framed photograph of the president and a faded poster about PTSD resources. Matthews closed the door and locked it. The click echoed in the small space. McAllister stood near the far wall, his arms crossed over his chest. Defensive posture. A man preparing to bare his soul while simultaneously trying to protect it. Sit, Matthews said, gesturing to the chairs. I'd rather stand. Suit yourself. Matthews pulled out a chair and sat down, deliberately casual, non-threatening. You want water? Coffee? I want to get this over with. Matthews nodded. Then start from the beginning. The mission, February 23rd, 1991. What happened? McAllister exhaled slowly, his eyes focusing on something far beyond the grey walls. When he spoke, his voice had changed, younger somehow, as if stepping back into that memory had stripped away the decades between. The mission was supposed to be simple. Extract 42 men from a compromised position, 20 clicks behind enemy lines. Intel said the area was hot but manageable. We'd done harder extractions before. We? Hawk Squadron. 4 pilots. I was 8. There was Hawk 3, Captain Rick Donovan, Hawk 5, Lieutenant Marcus Chen, and our squadron leader, Hawk 1, Major Sarah Brennan. Matthews pulled out a small notepad. Old habit. I remember hearing about Brennan. She got the Distinguished Flying Cross. She earned it. McAllister's jaw tightened. We all did. But she was something special. Best combat pilot I ever flew with. Fearless. Tell me about the mission. McAllister was quiet for a moment, his fingers tapping against his arm in a rhythm that might have been meaningful once. Morse code, maybe. Or the cadence of a heartbeat under stress. We launched at 0430 hours. 4 A-10s loaded for bear. The plan was tight coordination. Chen and I would provide close air support, while Brennan and Donovan went in for the extraction. Those 42 men were hunkered down in an abandoned factory compound, surrounded on 3 sides. Iraqi Republican Guard closing in fast. How close? Close enough that we could see them moving through our night vision. Maybe 200 meters out when we arrived. Another 10 minutes and those men would have been captured or killed. Matthews could picture it. Desert night, the green glow of NVGs. Men knowing they were running out of time, out of options, out of luck. What happened when you arrived? McAllister's eyes closed. Everything went to hell. The intel was wrong, dead wrong. I've heard the accounts. Then you know it's not like the movies. There's no graceful arc. You're tumbling, spinning, praying the chute deploys before you hit the ground. I remember pulling the handle. I remember the explosion as the seat fired. Then, nothing. Just fragments. You don't remember the chute deploying. I remember hitting the ground. That's all. I woke up in the sand, my chute tangled in some rocks, blood in my mouth. Couldn't move my left arm, something broken in my ribs. Head felt like someone had split it open with an axe. Matthews leaned forward. But you were alive, barely. And that's when things got complicated. Complicated how? McAllister looked at him with those pale blue eyes, and Matthews saw something in them that made his skin crawl. Not fear, not even pain. Shame. Because I wasn't alone when I landed, McAllister said quietly. There were 3 men standing over me when I came to. And they weren't Iraqi soldiers. What they'd called manageable was actually a goddamn fortress. 6 batteries we didn't know about. ZSU-23-4S positioned in a perfect kill box. We flew right into it. Jesus. Chen saw it first, called it out over the radio. But by then we were committed. Those men on the ground were counting on us. We couldn't just turn around and leave them to die. Matthews heard something shift in McAllister's voice. Not quite breaking, but bending under weight it had carried for too long. Brennan made the call, McAllister continued. We'd draw fire while they made the extraction. Classic sacrifice play. Chen and I would come in low, light up everything we saw, make ourselves the biggest, loudest targets in that desert, give Brennan and Donovan the window they needed to get those men out. That's suicide. That's the job. McAllister opened his eyes. We were combat pilots, Colonel. We knew the score. Sometimes you trade your life for others. That's not heroism, it's arithmetic. 4 pilots for 42 soldiers. The math works. But the math hadn't worked, had it? Matthews thought. Not entirely. "Walk me through it," he said quietly. McAllister began to pace, a slow, deliberate circuit around the conference table. His hands moved as he talked, sketching aircraft trajectories in the air, painting pictures of a battle 3 decades gone. Chen and I came in from the north, guns hot. We lit up everything, fuel trucks, ammunition depots, anything that would burn or explode, made enough noise to wake the dead. And it worked. Every gun in that compound swung toward us. The fluorescent lights flickered. Neither man noticed. AAA opened up like the 4th of July. Tracers everywhere. I could hear the rounds hitting my aircraft, that metallic ping that tells you something just punched through your fuselage, alarms screaming, warning lights across the panel. But the bird was still flying, and that's all that mattered. "How long did you maintain the run?" 4 minutes. Might not sound like much, but at 200 feet going 300 knots through a shitstorm of lead, 4 minutes is an eternity. We made 3 passes. Brennan and Donovan got those men loaded, every single one of them, and cleared the area. They made it out? Yeah, they made it out. McAllister stopped pacing, his back to Matthews. Chen and I turned south, trying to egress. That's when the SA-6 locked on. Matthews had seen footage of surface-to-air missiles in action, telephone poles moving at 3 times the speed of sound, trailing white smoke and death. Chen saw it first. He broke left, punching chaff and flares, screaming at me to break right. I did, but the missile, McAllister's voice caught. It didn't track him. It tracked me. How did you survive? I didn't. Not really. McAllister turned around and Matthews saw wetness on his cheeks. The missile hit my left engine, blew it clean off, shrapnel everywhere, hydraulics gone, electrical failing. The aircraft was breaking apart around me. You ejected. Last resort. The A-10 is tough. We called her the Warthog for a reason. She can take massive damage and still fly. But this, there was no flying out of this. I stayed with her as long as I could, trying to gain altitude, get over the border. But the warnings were screaming, and the stick was dead in my hands, and I knew I had maybe 5 seconds before she came apart completely. Where were you when you pulled the handle? About 15 clicks southwest of the compound, still in Iraqi territory, only 3,000 feet up, barely enough altitude for the chute to deploy properly. I pulled the handle and the memory seemed to physically hurt him. McAllister sat down heavily in one of the chairs, his hands gripping the armrests. The ejection sequence in an A-10 is violent. The canopy blows, the seat fires, and you're going from 300 knots to 0 in about 2 seconds. Your spine compresses. Your vision tunnels. Time does weird things. Matthews felt his stomach drop. What were they? Americans. What do you mean, Americans? Rescue team. No. McAllister's voice was flat now, emotionless. The tone of a man reciting facts he'd tried to forget. They were CIA, Special Activities Division, running a black op in the same area we just lit up like a Christmas tree. Matthews felt the pieces start to fall into place, and he didn't like the picture they were forming. Our mission compromised theirs, he said slowly. Worse than that, our mission destroyed theirs, completely. They'd been tracking an Iraqi general, high-value target, access to chemical weapons programs. They'd spent 6 months setting up a defection, 6 months of careful intelligence work, asset cultivation, risk management, everything in place for the extraction. And then you flew in with guns blazing. We didn't know. How could we? The mission was compartmentalized. We had our orders, they had theirs. But when we lit up that compound, we didn't just save 42 soldiers. We also alerted every Iraqi unit within 50 kilometers. The general's convoy never made it to the extraction point. They found him 3 days later with a bullet in his head. Matthews rubbed his face. Okay, that's bad. But it's not your fault. You were following orders. That's not the complicated part. McAllister's hands were shaking again. The complicated part is what those CIA officers told me while I was lying there in the sand, barely conscious, trying not to die from internal bleeding. What did they tell you? That the mission we'd just flown, the rescue of those 42 men, wasn't authorized through normal channels. Someone had gone around the proper command structure. Someone wanted those men extracted. Consequences be damned. Matthews felt cold. Who? They didn't give me names, but they showed me documents, mission orders, communications logs, all classified way above my pay grade. And the picture they painted? McAllister shook his head. Those 42 men were in that position because someone wanted them there. Bait, Colonel. They were bait for a larger operation. That's insane. The military doesn't sacrifice its own, doesn't it? McAllister's voice was sharp now, angry. We sacrifice people all the time. We just call it acceptable losses, strategic decisions, the needs of the many. But these men weren't supposed to be acceptable losses. They were supposed to be leverage, force the Iraqis to move assets around, create opportunities for intelligence gathering. Except someone got cold feet. Someone decided to actually save them. Brennan? Maybe. Or someone higher up the chain who grew a conscience. I don't know. What I do know is that rescue mission wasn't a rescue mission. It was someone going rogue, and it cost American intelligence a major asset. Matthews tried to process this. Even if that's true, and I'm not saying I believe it, why would the CIA tell you any of this? McAllister laughed, but there was no humor in it. Because they needed me to understand what was at stake. They'd just lost 6 months of work and a high-value target because of our mission. They were pissed, wanted someone to blame. And there I was, conveniently blown out of the sky, lying in their lap. They could have just left you there? They thought about it. I could see it in their eyes. They were calculating, but I was an American pilot, and there were rules about that. Even for them. So instead, they made me an offer. What kind of offer? The kind you can't refuse when you're bleeding out in enemy territory. McAllister's voice dropped. They'd get me out, medical care, transport back to friendly lines. But in exchange, I had to stay dead. Matthews stared at him. Why would they want that? Because if I came back, there would be questions. Debriefings, mission reports. Someone might start digging into why we were sent on that extraction in the first place. Someone might find the irregularities in the command chain, and that would expose the whole mess, the intelligence operation we'd compromised, the unauthorized rescue, the political clusterfuck that would ensue. So they buried you. They gave me a choice. Come back to life and become a loose end that might unravel something bigger. Or stay dead and let everyone remember Hawk 8 as a hero who died saving those 42 men. Clean. Simple. Noble. That's not a choice. That's extortion. That's reality. McAllister stood up and resumed his pacing. They gave me 12 hours to decide. 12 hours while their medic patched me up enough to survive. They laid it all out. What my life would look like if I came back. The questions. The investigations. The probability that someone would decide I knew too much and needed to have an accident. They threatened you. They didn't have to. I could read between the lines. Besides, they weren't wrong about the complications. If I came back and told the truth about what I'd learned, it would destroy the reputations of good men. Brennan, Chen, Donovan, those 42 soldiers who thought they'd been saved by heroes. All of it would be tainted by conspiracy theories and political agendas. Matthews felt sick. So you chose to disappear. I chose to let Hawk 8 stay a hero. To let those families grieve cleanly instead of drowning in scandal. To let those 42 men keep their gratitude instead of learning they'd been pawns in someone's power play. What about your family? He stopped pacing, his hands gripping the back of a chair so hard his knuckles went white. I had a wife, he said quietly, Jennifer, and a daughter. Sarah. She was 6 years old when I deployed, smart as a whip. Used to draw me pictures of airplanes, leave them under my pillow before I left on missions. They think you're dead. They mourned me. They moved on. Jennifer remarried. Good man from what I heard. Sarah grew up, went to college, got married herself, has kids now, my grandchildren. The pain in his voice was unbearable. They have a life that doesn't include me, McAllister continued. A good life. Why would I destroy that? Show up 33 years later like some ghost, tear open wounds that healed decades ago. So I could what? Feel better about myself? Have closure? They deserve to know you're alive. Do they? Or do they deserve to keep the memory they have? A father and husband who died a hero instead of a coward who chose to hide. You're not a coward. You saved 42 lives. And then I let everyone think I was dead because it was easier than facing the truth. Tell me that's not cowardice, Colonel. Matthews didn't have an answer for that. They sat in silence for a long moment. The fluorescent lights hummed. Outside, distant voices echoed down the hallway. What happened after you made the deal? Matthews asked finally. They got me out through channels that don't officially exist, treated my injuries at a facility that wasn't on any map, gave me new papers, civilian ID, nothing military, dropped me in Atlanta with $5,000 in cash and instructions to disappear. And you did. What choice did I have? They'd made it clear, if I surfaced, if I told anyone who I really was, the deal was off. And the deal wasn't just my safety, it was everyone's. Brennan, Chen, Donovan. The truth about what really happened that night. All of it stayed buried as long as I stayed dead. Where have you been all this time? McAllister shrugged. Everywhere, nowhere. Worked construction for a while, drove trucks. Lived in shelters when I had to, saved enough for a room when I could, always moving, never settling, can't risk someone recognizing me. In 33 years, no one has. A few close calls, other veterans mostly. They see the bearing, ask questions, I've gotten good at deflecting, but today, he looked at Matthews. Today I was tired. Too tired to keep lying. And you asked the right question. Why tell me the truth? Because you weren't going to let it go. I could see it in your eyes. You'd have started digging, making calls. Better to tell you myself, make you understand why this has to stay buried. Matthews stood up and walked to the door, then turned back. You're asking me to keep this secret. I'm telling you that revealing it will hurt more people than it helps. What about justice? Truth? Justice for who? The CIA officers who did what they thought was necessary, the commanders who authorized an unauthorized mission, the intelligence asset who died because we screwed up their operation, or me, the pilot who took a deal instead of being a hero. Those 42 men deserve to know. They know what matters. McAllister's voice was firm now. They know someone came for them. Someone risked everything to bring them home. That's the truth that matters. The rest is just politics and consequences. Matthews felt the weight of it settling on his shoulders. McAllister had been right. Knowing this did make him responsible for it. I need time to think about this, he said finally. I don't have time. The moment you walked out of that cafeteria with me, the clock started ticking. People saw us. People will talk. If word gets out that someone claiming to be Hawk 8 is alive, those CIA officers, or whoever replaced them, will come looking, and not to say hello. You think they'd actually? I think they've kept this secret for 33 years, and they won't hesitate to keep it permanent. Matthews felt a chill run down his spine. Then we need to protect you. The only protection is silence. I can't just pretend I didn't meet you. Pretend I don't know. A knock on the door interrupted him. Both men froze. Colonel Matthews, a woman's voice, young, probably one of the administrative staff. Sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here asking about you and the veteran you were talking to. Says it's urgent. Matthews and McAllister locked eyes. Matthews saw calculation there, and fear, and something else. Resignation. Who is it? Matthews called through the door. She says her name is Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Brennan. Air Force. She says she needs to speak with you immediately about Hawk Squadron. The color drained from McAllister's face. That's impossible, he whispered. She can't be here. She doesn't know. Apparently she does. Matthews moved toward the door, but McAllister grabbed his arm. Don't let her in here. Why? You said she was your squadron commander. If anyone deserves to know you're alive. You don't understand. Sarah Brennan died 6 months ago. I saw her obituary online. Pancreatic cancer. There was a memorial service at Arlington. The room seemed to tilt. Matthews looked at the door, then back at McAllister. Then who, he said slowly, is standing in my hallway? The knock came again, more insistent this time. Colonel Matthews, should I send her in? Matthews looked at McAllister, who had gone completely still. The old pilot's face had turned ashen, his breathing shallow. Whatever he'd been expecting, it wasn't this. Give us 1 minute, Matthews called out. Then quietly to McAllister, who would impersonate a dead officer? Someone who knows the story. Someone who knows that name would get your attention. McAllister's hands were trembling again, but not from age or hunger now, from fear. This is what I warned you about. They know I'm here. You don't know that? I know exactly that. 33 years of staying invisible, and the moment I speak my call sign out loud, someone shows up claiming to be my dead squadron commander. That's not coincidence, Colonel. That's a message. Matthews moved to the door but didn't open it. What kind of message? The kind that says, we know where you are and we can get to you any time we want. McAllister backed toward the far wall. You need to let me go. Out the back. Now. I'm not letting you run. Not until we find out what's really happening here. What's happening is exactly what I told you would happen. I should have kept my mouth shut. Should have stayed invisible. It's too late for that now. Matthews unlocked the door and opened it a crack. Send her in, but have security standing by in the hall. Yes, sir. Matthews stepped back and opened the door fully, positioning himself between the entrance and McAllister. Protective instinct. If this was a threat, he'd be the first line of defense. The woman who walked in was in her mid-50s, wearing an Air Force dress uniform with Lieutenant Colonel insignia, dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, streaked with grey, athletic build, sharp eyes that swept the room with practiced efficiency before settling on McAllister. Those eyes widened. "Oh, my God," she whispered. "It's really you?" McAllister stared at her, confusion and recognition warring on his face. "You're not Sarah Brennan." "No." The woman's voice cracked. "I'm her daughter, Sarah Brennan, Jr., but everyone calls me S.J." The tension in the room shifted from fear to something more complex. Matthews watched McAllister's face cycle through emotions. Relief, confusion, grief. "Sarah had a daughter," McAllister said slowly. "But she was just a baby when the mission happened. I was 2 years old. I don't remember you personally, but I grew up knowing your name, knowing what you did." S.J.'s eyes were wet now. "My mother talked about you, about Hawk 8, about the bravest pilot she ever flew with." "Your mother died," McAllister said, "and it wasn't a question. 6 months ago. Cancer." S.J. wiped her eyes quickly, professionally. "She fought it for 2 years, had time to get her affairs in order, and before she died she told me something. Something she'd kept secret for 33 years. Matthews felt the pieces starting to shift again, forming a new pattern he hadn't anticipated. "What did she tell you?" he asked. SJ looked at him, assessing. "Who are you?" "Colonel David Matthews. I run the Veterans Outreach Program here. I was talking to Jim, to Captain McAllister, when you arrived." "And he told you who he really is?" "He told me enough." SJ nodded slowly, then turned back to McAllister. "My mother knew you were alive. She's known since 1991. The words hung in the air like smoke. McAllister's legs seemed to give out. He sat down heavily, his face a mask of shock. "That's impossible. The CIA said..." "The CIA lied." SJ's voice was hard now, about a lot of things. "My mother spent 33 years trying to figure out what really happened that night. She never bought the official story, never believed you were killed in that explosion." "How did she know?" "Because she was the one who saw you eject. She circled back after the extraction, against orders, to confirm your crash site. She saw your chute deploy, saw you land, and she saw 3 men in civilian clothes move toward your position." Matthews felt his understanding of the story shift again. "She saw the CIA pickup. She saw something that didn't fit the official narrative. So she started asking questions. Quietly, carefully. She knew if she pushed too hard, she'd get shut down or worse. But over the years, she pieced it together. Why didn't she tell anyone?" McAllister's voice was hollow. "She tried. Got a visit from 2 very serious men who explained that some things were classified for reasons of national security. That pursuing certain lines of inquiry would be bad for her career, bad for the people she cared about. She got the message. So she dropped it. No. She just got smarter about it." SJ pulled out a thick envelope from her uniform jacket. "She spent 33 years gathering evidence, documents, testimony, proof that the mission you flew that night wasn't what it seemed, that you were set up to take the fall for an intelligence operation that went sideways." McAllister stared at the envelope like it might explode. "Why? Why would she do that?" "Because you were her wingman. Because you saved 42 lives, because you deserved better than to be erased." SJ's voice softened. "And because she felt guilty." Guilty? She had nothing to feel guilty about. She was the one who authorized the mission. Oh, she had orders, but those orders came through irregular channels. She knew something was off, but she flew the mission anyway because there were men on the ground who needed help. And when you went down, when you disappeared, she always wondered if she could have done something different. Matthews watched McAllister process this. Decades of isolation, of believing he'd been abandoned, suddenly recontextualizing into something else. Someone had remembered. Someone had cared. "She looked for you," SJ continued, "for years. Followed every lead, every rumor of a veteran matching your description. Checked homeless shelters, VA hospitals, anywhere a lost pilot might end up. She never stopped looking. Did she ever get close?" "Twice. Once in Dallas, 2003, once in Phoenix, 2011. But by the time she got there, you'd already moved on." McAllister closed his eyes. "I was in both those cities. If she'd found me, she would have brought you home. That's what she wanted, more than anything, to bring you home." SJ held out the envelope. "When the cancer diagnosis came, she knew she was running out of time. She put everything in here, all her research, all the evidence, and she made me promise that if I ever found you, I'd give you a choice." "What choice?" "The same choice you were given 33 years ago. Stay dead and keep the secret, or come back and let the truth be known. The CIA are mostly retired or dead, the operation you compromised. Ancient history. The world has moved on. The only thing keeping you in hiding now is your own fear." McAllister took the envelope with shaking hands. "How did you find me?" I've been tracking social media posts from veterans events across the country, looking for any mention of someone who might be you. This morning, someone posted a photo from this cafeteria. In the background, barely visible, there's a man sitting alone. But the angle of his shoulders, the way he held his coffee cup. My mother had photos of you. I recognized the posture. That's impossible. From one photo, I've been looking for 33 years too. I was raised on this search. My mother made it my mission before it was even mine. SJ smiled sadly. I drove 6 hours this morning on the possibility it might be you. When I got here and asked if anyone had seen an older veteran with military bearing sitting alone, they pointed me to you. Matthews felt the enormity of it washing over him. A daughter spending her entire life searching for a man she'd never met, carrying her mother's torch of loyalty and guilt. There's something else, SJ said quietly. The 42 men you saved that night? They've been meeting every year since 1991. Every February 23rd, they call it Hawk Day. McAllister looked up sharply. What? They gather. All of them, or as many as can make it, to honor the 4 pilots who came for them, to remember that someone gave everything to bring them home. She pulled out her phone, scrolled through photos. This is from last year's gathering. She held up the screen. Dozens of men, older now, grey-haired or bald but standing proud, gathered around a memorial stone. Engraved on it were 4 names: Major Sarah Brennan, Captain James McAllister, Captain Rick Donovan, Lieutenant Marcus Chen. They raised money for that memorial, installed it at Fort Campbell. Every year they lay wreaths. Every year they tell their children and grandchildren about the pilots who saved their lives. About Hawk 8, the pilot who drew enemy fire so they could get out. McAllister's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the phone. His eyes were locked on the image, on his own name carved in stone. They think I'm dead, he whispered. They think you're a hero. And they're right. SJ took back her phone. This year's gathering is in 3 days, February 23rd, 2024, 33 years exactly. They're expecting about 60 people, the original 42 plus their families, kids, grandkids, all of them alive because of what you did. I can't face them. They'll have questions. They'll have gratitude. SJ's voice was firm. My mother's last wish wasn't just to find you. It was to bring you home, to let those men say thank you while they still could. Some of them are in their 80s now. They won't be around forever. Don't let them die without knowing the truth. Matthews saw the struggle playing out on McAllister's face. 33 years of hiding versus 3 days until a reckoning. The safety of invisibility versus the possibility of redemption. What if the truth hurts them? McAllister asked quietly. What if knowing I've been alive all this time, that I chose to stay away, makes them feel betrayed? What if it doesn't? SJ countered. What if knowing you're alive is the greatest gift they could receive? I'm not the man they remember. I'm not the hero they think I am. You're exactly the man they remember. You're just older, worn down, human, but still the pilot who flew into hell to bring them home. The fluorescent lights hummed. Outside voices echoed, the ordinary sounds of life continuing while the world shifted for one forgotten pilot. Matthews spoke up. Captain McAllister, I'm going to step outside and give you two some privacy. But before I do, I need to say something. Both of them looked at him. I've been in the military for 37 years. I've seen courage in a lot of forms. Combat valor, moral courage, the strength to keep going when everything says to quit. But I've never seen anything like what you've done. Carrying this burden alone for 33 years to protect other people, that's not cowardice. That's sacrifice on a level most people can't even comprehend. I ran away. You took the only option that kept everyone else safe. But running time is over. Those men deserve to know you're alive. Your family deserves to know, and you deserve to stop punishing yourself for surviving." McAllister was silent for a long moment. "If I go to this gathering," he said finally, "everything changes. There will be questions, media. The story will come out. Only the story you want to tell," SJ said. "The envelope my mother left you, that's insurance. It contains enough classified information to make certain people very uncomfortable if it went public. You have leverage now. You don't have to stay silent anymore. And my family, my wife remarried, my daughter has her own life. What do I do about them? That's up to you. My mother's notes include their contact information, current addresses, but whether you reach out to them or not, that's your decision. Nobody's forcing you to do anything except stop hiding from the people who want to honor you." Matthews moved toward the door. "I'm going to step out. You two figure out what happens next. But, Captain, whatever you decide, you're not alone in this anymore." He left them there. The lost pilot and the daughter of his squadron commander, connected by 33 years of searching and secrets. 3 days later, Fort Campbell, Kentucky. The memorial garden was exactly as it had appeared in the photo. Mature trees providing shade, carefully maintained grass. And at the center, the stone monument with 4 names carved into black granite. Colonel Matthews stood near the back of the gathering crowd, watching people arrive. The original 42, or 38 of them, the ones still living, came with spouses, children, grandchildren. Some walked with canes, some used wheelchairs, but they all came. They'd been gathering like this for 33 years, SJ had explained. First as an informal reunion, then as something more sacred, a ritual of remembrance, an annual act of gratitude. Matthews watched SJ move through the crowd, greeting people, setting up for the ceremony. She'd worked miracles in 3 days, coordinating with public affairs, arranging security, ensuring this day would unfold the way her mother had envisioned. But the real miracle was standing beside Matthews, dressed in a borrowed uniform that SJ had somehow procured. Captain's insignia on the shoulders, wings on the chest. No ribbons, those had been lost in 3 decades of wandering, but the uniform itself was enough. James McAllister looked terrified. "I can't do this," he muttered for the 10th time. "What if they're angry? What if they won't be?" Matthews kept his voice low, confident. "Trust me. I don't even know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Just be present. Let them see you. Sometimes that's enough." The ceremony began at 1100 hours, the same time the extraction mission had launched 33 years earlier. SJ stood at a podium, her voice clear and strong. 33 years ago today, 42 American soldiers were trapped behind enemy lines. They were surrounded, outgunned, and running out of time. Command had written them off, told them to hold as long as they could and prepare for capture. The crowd was silent, attentive. Many of them had heard this story dozens of times, but they never tired of it. But 4 pilots refused to accept that. Major Sarah Brennan, Captain Rick Donovan, Lieutenant Marcus Chen, and Captain James McAllister, Hawk 8. They flew into an impossible situation and brought every single one of those men home. SJ paused, emotion flickering across her face. 3 of those pilots came home that night. 1, we believed, did not. Captain McAllister's aircraft was destroyed by a surface-to-air missile. His crash site was found, but not his body. For 33 years, we've honored his sacrifice here at this memorial. We've told our children about his courage. We've carved his name in stone so that no one would forget. Matthews watched McAllister's face. The pilot was pale, his jaw clenched, fighting back tears. "But today," SJ continued, her voice stronger now, "I stand before you with news that will change everything we thought we knew." The crowd stirred, confused murmurs. Captain James McAllister did not die in 1991. He survived the crash. He survived injuries that should have killed him. He survived 33 years of hardship and isolation, and today he has chosen to come home. The murmurs grew louder. Disbelief, hope, confusion. "Ladies and gentlemen," S.J. said, her eyes finding McAllister in the crowd, "I present to you Captain James Hawk 8 McAllister." Matthews put a hand on McAllister's shoulder. "Go." For a moment the old pilot didn't move. Then slowly he stepped forward, out from behind the crowd, into view. The murmurs stopped. Complete silence. 42 men, now in their 70s and 80s, stared at the figure in the captain's uniform, stared at the weathered face, the grey hair, the scared eyes of a man who'd been dead for 33 years. One man stood up from his wheelchair. His hands were shaking, his eyes wet. "Hawk 8, his voice cracked. "Is that really you?" McAllister tried to speak, but his voice failed. He nodded instead. The man took a step forward, then another. Faster now, his walker forgotten. "You son of a bitch," he said, and his voice was full of wonder. "You beautiful son of a bitch, you're alive." Then he was running, as much as an 80-year-old man could run, and throwing his arms around McAllister, holding him, sobbing into his shoulder. "We thought we lost you. We thought you died saving us." "I'm sorry," McAllister whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Sorry? For what? For being alive?" The man pulled back, gripping McAllister's shoulders. "Do you know what this means? Do you know what you've given us?" Another man stood up, then another. Then all of them, the entire gathering, rising to their feet, not speaking, not cheering, just standing in silent acknowledgement of something too large for words. McAllister stood at the center of it all, overwhelmed, tears streaming down his face. Matthews watched as, one by one, the 42 men approached. Each one shook his hand or embraced him. No one spoke. There was nothing to say that silence couldn't express better. The children and grandchildren watched, most of them crying. They were witnessing something they'd never expected, a resurrection, a miracle, the return of a legend who'd only ever existed in stories. Finally, an elderly man with a lieutenant colonel's insignia approached. He was using a cane, moving slowly, but with determination. His name tag read, Harrison. He stopped in front of McAllister and saluted. "Captain, sir, Lieutenant Harrison, 101st Airborne. I was one of the 42. His voice was steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I want you to know something. Not a day has passed in 33 years that I haven't thought about you, about what you sacrificed so we could live. I have 3 children and 7 grandchildren because of what you did. My wife of 42 years exists because I came home that night." He reached up and unpinned something from his uniform, a silver star medal, worn and treasured. "This is yours, sir. You earned it. We all know you earned it, and now, finally, we can give you what you've deserved all along." He pinned the medal to McAllister's uniform, his hands steady despite their age. "Welcome home, Hawk 8. It's been too damn long." The crowd erupted. Not with cheers, but with applause, steady, respectful, filled with 3 decades of pent-up gratitude. It rolled across the memorial garden like thunder, and it didn't stop. McAllister stood there, overwhelmed, his hand pressed against the medal on his chest. The silver star that should have been his 33 years ago. The recognition he'd thought he'd never receive. Matthews felt tears on his own face. He'd seen a lot of things in his career, but he'd never seen anything like this. Pure, undiluted gratitude. Love for a man who'd given everything and asked for nothing in return. When the applause finally faded, S.J. stepped forward again. "There's more," she said. "My mother, Major Sarah Brennan, left detailed instructions for this day. She always believed that if Captain McAllister was found, there should be a proper ceremony, not just recognition, but reconciliation, healing. She gestured, and several uniformed officers stepped forward carrying a folded American flag, an updated Silver Star citation, and documents bearing official seals. By order of the Secretary of the Air Force, and with the full support of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Captain James McAllister is hereby reinstated to full active duty status, retroactive to February 23, 1991. All pay, benefits, and honors are restored. Your service record has been updated to reflect your continued survival and the classified nature of the circumstances that led to your previous status. Matthews saw McAllister's knees buckle slightly. S.J. moved quickly to support him, along with Lieutenant Colonel Harrison and 2 other veterans. Furthermore, S.J. continued, in recognition of extraordinary heroism and 3 decades of silent sacrifice, Captain James McAllister is hereby promoted to the rank of Major and awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Purple Heart. Another officer stepped forward and pinned the additional medals to McAllister's chest. The pilot stood there, supported by the men he'd saved, wearing the honors he'd been denied. "You don't have to hide anymore," S.J. said quietly, meant only for him, but caught by the microphone. "You're home now." McAllister looked around at the faces surrounding him. 42 men who owed him their lives, their families who owed him their existence. S.J., who'd spent her life searching for him. Matthews, who'd refused to let him stay invisible. "I don't..." His voice was hoarse. "I don't know what to say." "Then let me say something," Harrison spoke up. "On behalf of all 42 of us and our families and every person who exists because of what you did that night, thank you. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for surviving, even when it was harder than dying would have been. Thank you for coming home." The applause returned, stronger this time. And in the middle of it all, James Hawk 8 McAllister finally allowed himself to accept what he'd been running from for 33 years. Forgiveness, recognition, peace. 6 weeks later. The coffee shop in suburban Maryland was quiet on a Tuesday afternoon. Matthews sat in a corner booth, watching the door. McAllister arrived right on time. Old habits die hard. He looked different now, clean-shaven, haircut, new clothes that actually fit. But more than that, he looked lighter, like a weight had been lifted. "Colonel." He slid into the booth across from Matthews. "I keep telling you, it's David. We're not on duty." "You're never not on duty." But McAllister smiled as he said it. They ordered coffee, made small talk, danced around the real topic for a few minutes. Finally, Matthews asked, "You ready for this?" McAllister looked out the window. Across the street was a small house with a well-maintained garden, a minivan in the driveway, a child's bicycle on the front porch. "No," he said honestly, "but I'm doing it anyway." "She knows you're coming," S.J. called her. "Explained everything. She agreed to meet me. That's all I can ask for." "What about Jennifer?" "What? One step at a time, Sarah first. If she wants nothing to do with me, then that's my answer about the rest of the family. But if she's willing to talk..." His voice trailed off, hope and fear mixing equally. Matthews reached across and gripped his shoulder. "You've faced harder things than this." "Have I?" "I flew into enemy fire. I survived in the desert with broken ribs and a concussion. I lived on the streets for 3 decades. But walking across that street and knocking on my daughter's door, that's the most terrifying thing I've ever done. Because it matters most. Because it matters most," McAllister agreed. They finished their coffee in comfortable silence. Then McAllister stood up, straightened his jacket, a nice one now, purchased with his newly restored military pension, and headed for the door. Matthews watched him cross the street, saw him pause at the end of the driveway, gathering courage. Then walk forward and knock on the door. It opened. A woman in her mid-30s stood there. Even from this distance, Matthews could see the resemblance, her father's eyes, her father's jawline. She stared at McAllister for a long moment. Then she stepped forward and hugged him. Just held him, there on her front porch, while her father's shoulders shook with sobs he'd been holding back for 33 years. Matthews looked away, giving them privacy. Some moments were too sacred for witnesses. His phone buzzed. A text from SJ. Memorial dedication next month. Pentagon confirmed. Full honors. You coming? He typed back. Wouldn't miss it. The Pentagon had moved quickly once the story broke. The classified aspects remained classified. The intelligence operation, the CIA involvement, all of that stayed buried. But the human story that they celebrated. A pilot who'd sacrificed everything to save 42 men, then sacrificed another 33 years to protect them from scandal. That was the official narrative now, and it was true enough. The media had run with it. The pilot who came home, read the headlines. Invisible hero emerges after 33 years. Hawk 8 rises again. Matthews had watched McAllister handle the attention with grace and humility. He did interviews but kept them focused on the other pilots, on the 42 men, on service and sacrifice rather than his own suffering. He was uncomfortable with the hero worship, but he accepted it as the price of coming home. Across the street, the front door of the house opened again. This time, 2 children ran out, McAllister's grandchildren, though they didn't know it yet. They stared at the old man with curious eyes, while their mother stood behind them, smiling through tears. Matthews stood up to leave. This was their moment, not his. He'd played his part, the catalyst who'd asked the right question at the right time. But as he reached his car, his phone rang. McAllister. David? It's me. Everything okay? More than okay. McAllister's voice was thick with emotion. She wants me to meet the kids, to stay for dinner. She said she always knew I wasn't really gone, that she felt it somehow. And now she wants me to be part of their lives. That's wonderful. Thank you for everything, for not letting me walk away, for making me face this. You faced it yourself. I just pointed you in the right direction. Still, you gave me my life back. Matthews got in his car but didn't start the engine. You gave 42 men their lives back. You earned this. They said their goodbyes. Matthews sat there for a moment, thinking about the journey that had started with a simple question in a VA cafeteria. What was your call sign? 2 words that had changed everything. He looked back at the house one more time. Through the window he could see McAllister sitting on a couch, his daughter beside him, the grandchildren climbing into his lap, a family reunited, a circle closed. The room had gone silent that day when McAllister said, Hawk 8. But now, finally, that silence had been broken by something better. Welcome home,